My name is Tarek. Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel.
The Turkish player XANTARES, formerly of Space Soldiers, has been announced as the newest member of Big Berlin International Gaming, B's team, and he is temporarily replacing Nex in the starting lineup, who has wrist injuries, but it was also implied, particularly by Tabson, that Nex may return from his surgery. They might run a six-man roster, changing people in and out, as in a true six-man rotation where someone actually plays set maps, or in this scenario, you swap people in and out. It's not just one person is a sub. Tabson himself even extended the concept further and implied like maybe CSGO will get to a point, which we have in games like League of Legends, in Overwatch, in the Overwatch League, where you don't just have subs, you have a real rotation, and the CS equivalent of what's done in those games would be between games, you take someone out, maybe you bring someone in for a specific map, maybe you bring them in for a specific half, maybe they're a CT train player, but they're not very good on T-sided train. That's what Tabson tried to imply, to show that they're in any sense committed to this concept of rotation and continuing to use Nex. This isn't, in theory, purely Nex being kicked out of the team or slowly shuffled out the back door and XANTARES brought in as the new fifth player. Obviously, we can discuss how plausible that is. In terms of for Space Soldiers, basically, this team was already fucked anyway. It was a few months ago now that the players basically refused to play for the organization anymore and then were labeled as inactive. They'd already, throughout the year, been battling against the org, at one point in time blacking out part of their social media. The implication was they either hadn't been paid or weren't paid enough, or there had some sort of dispute over their contracts. Supposedly, the org itself was in a bad spot the whole time. Like, they never had a lot of money. Obviously, being stuck in Turkey, they're nearly limited to Turkish players. And then they have the whole visa problem where when you have 5 of them applying to go to a foreign event, all it takes is 1 or 2 not getting their visa and you're fucked for the whole event, as we unfortunately saw most notably for the major where they had to use hardstyle. So, obviously, we're talking about the first major of the year, the Boston major here. No, actually, what am I talking about? Obviously, it's the Face It major, right? So that is the reason, by the way, just to get this out of the way, as to why Woxic doesn't want to join the Space Soldiers, as to why Tarek isn't going to be going and joining Space Soldiers. Like, these guys aren't going to go and play for a tiny amount of money, a pittance, less than an MDL team will play in North America, and have visa issues, and be stuck off in another country that's not an ideal spot anyway. No, nobody's going to do that. The only logical scenario is for people to eventually leave Space Soldiers, as XANTARES has done. He was the most famous player in the team. This already, if the lineup had been fully active, would be the end for them anyway, quite frankly. He was the best player in the team. Like, he was a lot of the reason why they ever won games. If you lose him, you're going to be much, much worse. Quite frankly, he was a big part of why they were online, able to qualify for offline competition, or at least play at a high level at times online, perhaps punching above their weight. So now they lose him. Yeah, it's pretty much done for Space Soldiers. Obviously, if you could have kept hold of him, you would have. You couldn't, though. So moving on to XANTARES, yes, it was absolutely, for some of the reasons listed above, the right move to leave Space Soldiers. It was a team that was going nowhere. They had capped out completely because in the early days, it was just XANTARES going ham. Then they got Calyx into the lineup finally. Okay, there's some more firepower. They were two pretty solid players. Paz was a pretty decent frag, even though I wouldn't put him on their level, you know. That's why people looked to these moves like, what if Tarek one day joined it? Wow, why doesn't Woxic just join and be the star AWPer? Because this is the only way you could really see the team improving, is like leveling up a few of their players, and there weren't any more really high level players as far as we can tell within Turkey to replace any of these other players. And yet as a squad they didn't really fill out the roles very well, and as a team they weren't particularly good. They were, quite frankly, as a team, mad onliners. They had this very one-dimensional aggressive playing style on LAN, and they had a very limited map pool. So in the world of Space Soldiers, beyond the map pool just killing them dead if they ever got to lands, and the fact that they would look much worse on LAN than they did online, and I know people are going to say, well, there's many teams look better online. No, they looked way better online and could beat like the likes of FaZe online, but on LAN could lose to, like, we're talking bottom top 10 teams not even in the top 10 in best of ones, and in series play, they were almost never relevant except for the lower tier 2 during like open type tournaments. They were never a series team because they never had a consistent style or a solid map pool to work with. So in a world where he gets a chance to leave and go to a better team, absolutely take that. You've given your years to this squad. It was him in the early days, then he got Calyx some help, you capped it out. They basically played around fragging anyway. They went as far as their skill would take them. It's absolutely the right choice to move. And to go to big, I think this is a great move for XANTARES. It's a chance to finally work with a truly established great in-game leader. We don't really know who Major is in CSGO. He never did anything that relevant in 1.6 and wasn't an in-game leader most of the time anyway. So quite frankly, I don't put Major up as a great in-game leader. I'll have to see him prove it before I go ahead and show out. Space Soldiers, if anything, suggested he wasn't, quite frankly. So putting someone like XANTARES with his skill level with a God B, yeah, that's a great move for XANTARES. He could potentially learn a lot. Could potentially be used in different ways or have his playing style tweaked to make him much more effective and make him, quite frankly, a more dangerous player as a result. He's also going to a fully formed team already that is ready to go. They've already been playing for a whole bunch of time now. They've got their core in place. They've got their maps. They've had their experience at LANs. And he may yet be the missing piece. And if he is, all he has to do is come in, play his game, take a little bit of direction, figure out his role, and the rest of the team is ready to go. They are ready, in theory, to get those big results that presumably he wants to have that he never had when he's in Space Soldiers. They were never a relevant team when it came to playoffs, quite frankly, with the one exception maybe of that WESG tournament where, yeah, they could have won the whole tournament, but they didn't, and they lost to Fnatic. Now, for big, it's definitely the right move to let Nex go and have this surgery, because if he really does have, like, RSI or some sort of, like, carpal tunnel syndrome or something, like, rest at a minimum is needed, which surgery is going to allow for. But also, if you can have the surgery and you can loosen it up and then you can recover from it, as we've seen people like Shox have, as Flash did in StarCraft Brood War, I think it's worth going for it. Because if you want to keep playing for a few more years, you don't want to be playing in pain, you don't want to be keeping damaging it, you're not going to get time off if you don't have any sort of surgery. No one's just going to give you 6 months off and keep you on a roster and keep you relevant. So you have to do something with that. Nex was already a player who had his problems in big, so why not just go and let him do it? If he comes back and it means that his wrist is healed and he's at a better level and now he can somehow level up his get, great. If he doesn't, it's not the end of the world. So quite frankly, even if this was kind of a sneak move to, like, oh, let him go get a surgery, we'll try out XANTARES, we'll see about a 6-man lineup. What's that? You've come back? Yeah, you can't. Oh, sorry, you haven't won your spot back, actually. We would give you a sixth position, but you're not really in position. Like, I don't really care either way on that one. I'm kind of done with Nex, as people know. I think he's a mad overrated player. I know nowadays he's not that overrated, but just because people still believe Big had potential and more promise, was I think he's one of the reasons, actually, he's what I call a limiting factor. Like, you can't get much further as a team if he's one of your players who's supposed to be giving you firepower, and he just doesn't do it that often or against the biggest teams and the biggest lands. So for me, I wanted him out the door anyways. The obvious player I wanted removed. Like, I actually think Smooya has promise, even though he has some issues himself. I think Nex is the all logical player to remove. So he's too inconsistent still as a player. He's fool's gold, or at least has a fool's gold type effect on you, because the games that he does go harm and drop 30 and look really strong, like when he played against the FaZe Clan guys or when he was playing in the final against Na'Vi at times, then you think, right, well, we're fine. Firepower's great. What are you talking about? Nex is doing great. And so as a result, you don't make the hard decision. You don't make a change in what you're doing. You don't change up your line. You just keep hoping that Nex is going to come and deliver with consistency, which I can go ahead and tell you, people in Big, people in Mouse Sports have been hoping that for like 3 or 4 years now, we're talking. So it's unrealistic to expect the guy to just turn a corner like that, especially because as far as we can tell, he doesn't seem to be doing anything to try and improve upon this. He's not someone who's going out there working with sports psychologists, as far as I can tell, studying what he's doing. He doesn't even seem to admit that there's even a real problem. Like, I've even heard him push back on the angle, which I'd been told by his teammates, that he has issues on stage. He's pushed back, so that's not even true. So God knows where Nex is at. I just abandon players like that. I'm sorry. Let that be someone else's problem. I guess he is, because he's in Big, which is never a big squad. Ignore that. They're never a team with great stature or one of the best teams in the world until this year, when they started to creep into the top 10 and started doing impressive things once they got Smooya. So I guess it wasn't really an issue before. He kind of was out of sight, out of mind. But now he's back, and now he's someone who's been I think, a problem player for Big. Because if you look at the Big squad, the reality is this. They had one player who could play at a world-class level in terms of a star-type player every game, and that was Tabson. He was a very consistent player, very versatile player. He can AWP, he can rifle. He's just a really skilled player, and they used him. He was kind of a very a player who used his skill. They didn't put him on in scenarios where, like, they win the whole game off him fragging everyone, but like it's all on his shoulders. No, they more used him as like a stable player, a player who consistently plays the same angles over and over again. Even as an AWP, he wasn't super aggro. He would hold his angles and just hit all the shots that he needs to, and as a result, you could really rely upon him. So it was mainly Tabson who was the player you could rely on. Smooya was hit and miss, but when he would hit, he would either have great impact on the game or he would occasionally have big fragging games. His problem was he could also be shaky, they could drop down, and even when they had those two, that enough wasn't going to get you over the line against the absolute best teams in the world. Like, GODB's tactics could make up for a lot and could kind of be a third star in that sense, but you really needed more overall firepower, because when Nex wouldn't show up, Tizigan's a good player, but he's not set up to be in any kind of a star. GODB's actually a pretty poor fragging game leader, even though he's done some impressive things this year at certain tournaments, fragging above and beyond his level. So firepower, clearly for me, the whole time they've had this lineup with Smooya has been the big limiting factor. They couldn't go much further, despite the fact they are putting in the practice, the fact that they've got some good role players, some good young pieces, some quality players overall, pretty good roles set up, nice map pool. Like, it was clear that firepower was the limiting factor. So getting XANTARES, well, great move, because immediately you've taken care of some of the firepower issues. And you got to consider, okay, yeah, there are much better players than XANTARES out there in terms of overall players, not necessarily pure skill-wise, but the difference is, what options do you have to get those players, right? Financially, in terms of the background and culture of your team, in terms of some of the players in your team. I know international fans, just observers, might be big fans of GODB. There aren't tons of star players rushing to join a team like Big. First of all, you won't get paid very much. It's not a team that's like at the top level. You're not getting invites to all the events. You're not going to win a major. Like, at the moment, it's a big gamble for anyone to go there. And most people aren't going to do it. Most people are going to take the higher dollar amount, even playing in somewhere like NA. So of the options they did have, XANTARES is actually one of the best they could have gotten and one of the most skilled, and actually fits the bill of at least the basics of what they needed, which was some firepower and perhaps an aggressive player. Because clearly XANTARES is a pretty mechanically skilled player. I mean, you look at his spray with a M4A4, very consistent. You look at his bursts and sprays with an AK, it's fucking outrageous. He has an exceptional first few bullets on the AK. Like, what's interesting is he doesn't kill you with like the first bullet. He does a spray every time, but he always gets that headshot. It's ridiculous with AK. He is a pretty strong player in that respect. So, like, you know what? It's not as though anyone denies this. Like, we understand there can be one-off individual talents or very good players who are much above skill-wise the level of the players from their countries. I mean, in 1.6, we had MSX from France. We had Oscar from Czech Republic / Slovakia, Slovenia, all those countries. We had Musambani from Spain in the early days. We had Kogu when Brazil was still coming up, but wasn't a top country. Firepower is clearly what they needed in Big. And so he brings that. He brings this very strong AK, so I can love to see him in a team that's very tactical on the T side, like GODB's got. He likes at times to play as an entry player. I noticed it was interesting the way they used him in Space Soldiers. Because even though the team has this rep, justifiably so, of like very aggressive, like we'll just rush in, like go without utility sometimes, like play balls to the wall, straight in your face. Like, he wasn't always doing that. Like, he was an aggressive player, but he's like aggressive in for him, a controlled manner. Like, he'll push out, takes an angle. When he's got angles he thinks people are going to be out, they might pre-fire him or peek him. He'll just stay holding those angles. So interestingly, I noticed on certain maps like Mirage, sometimes because he'd be like the guy coming out of Palace, they'd use him on the outskirts and he'd just stay and hold there or probe while the others pushed the B site and just wait and see what's going to happen. On maps like Inferno, he might be the guy leading the charge up the banana on the T side and they wait for him to take the initial peaks. But what's interesting is that they tended to use him like to take the initial peaks that are like the spots where you're going to need to have very good aim, you're going to have to make that first kill. But once he's taken the outskirts of a bomb site, actually he wouldn't necessarily always be the guy pushing into the bomb site. Beyond that, sometimes it would be other teammates. He would just hold one angle that people could peek into, and his other teammates would go into the site, or he'd hold this spot and they'd rotate off and go elsewhere. And actually, generally, Space Soldiers, one of the things about their team was they seemed to try to create chaos by having a bunch of players, XANTARES included, go to one spot on the map that's different from each other, peek those spots simultaneously, at least on the outskirts of those areas, and then try and take a bunch of aim duels and therefore throw the CTs off as to where they were. So I definitely think he has kind of a defined playing style from Space Soldiers, and I want to see how will that fit into this style from Big, because it's a very different style in Big. You're playing off GODB's reads. He's set up a playbook already, and you have a set role within a tactic. It's not about just run to your favorite 2 or 3 spots or say, hey, I'm going mid doors or dust 2 this time, and then you just push up by yourself without utility, without flashes, and just take a raw aim duel. Like, that's not really the Big style. So my big question is this, is can they take this playing style and skill set of XANTARES and simultaneously integrate it to what Big wants to do, so Big keep all of their strengths, but without diminishing XANTARES' strengths. Now, if you can elevate his strengths, obviously that would be ideal. I don't know if that's possible. If you could just get what he gave Space Soldiers, but integrate it into Big, that would be a very exciting prospect. I don't know if that's entirely possible, though. I'm certainly interested to find out overall. I hope God B can use him along those lines and make him an aggressive player. Like, one of the things I hated about when they had Phelps in SK is even though they were an amazing team and Phelps did pretty well at times, it was clear because of the existence of Fur, they were never going to fully unleash Phelps and give him his game. I mean, they did early on, but then when they lost a few times, I think that they kind of like put the blinkers on him, like to use the horse analogy, or they just told him like only play in these spots, don't be aggressive beyond this, because he looked like a player who had in either mentally or literally a defined sort of radius of where he was allowed to go during a round while other things happened and then he was allowed to move on. So I hope they don't kind of put the shackles on XANTARES in that sense, even though I will admit if they can't play fully into his style because you don't want to give up too much of the strengths of Big and being that very good tactical team and particularly being a very good utility team. And actually XANTARES and his teams weren't very good utility teams or very tactical teams. So there is a bit of a clash there. But you know what? First of all, you've got God B. He's going to be someone who's going to look to shape a guy and bring the best out of him. Generally gets the best out of the players who play with him. He's also got that whole like Turkish connection because of God B's ethnicity and his family history. So maybe he'll even have a sense for who XANTARES is as a person and what type of a person he is and how to use him, as opposed to if you just had just a bunch of Germans who've only ever known German people. Admittedly, there's obviously a decent amount of Turkish people in Germany from the 70s, etc. But if you were in that scenario where they didn't understand Turkish culture, I could see there being a mismatch there. I don't think that's a big issue because of God B being there. I'm also excited, quite frankly, to see what they can do in terms of, like, XANTARES is known to have a pretty ridiculous deagle. Well, I never thought actually that Big was that good low econ or on the sort of force buy scenarios. I thought they were a team that needed the economy behind them, somewhat reminiscent of NRG in that particular sense. So bringing his deagle and how dangerous it is to the team, that's pretty exciting all in all, I think. I think that you can have a player who goes counter to the overall team philosophy because then that balances you out a little bit. He can actually be someone where you even use the fact he's a bit more of a kind of a live wire, a bit more chaotic to add that element so the opponent has to, as I always use the example of JW in Fnatic, the classic version, probably Stu2K and Cloud9 at times. By having these players be the one that goes off and does the unexpected things and then the rest play more of a base style, you can find a lot of success doing that. It's a great kind of approach to take in the game all in all. So I would say personally, I'm interested to see how it will affect that team color, the team balance, like whether it takes away too much of Big to give XANTARES his skills, whether it takes away too much from XANTARES to make Big that much better. That'll be the real question. Because obviously Nex played with God B for a long time. As many feelings as Nex has, Nex knows what God B wants. God B knows what he wants from Nex. And God B apparently, this is always a shock to me, was happy with what Nex was giving him. Didn't seem to have his complaints. Never seemed to have his issue with that. In many ways, I think God B suffers from a problem that I myself had when I used to be a player and play as an in-game leader. And I've seen many really good in-game leaders have, which is, I think of people like Sean Gares, God B, MSL. They don't tend to make the really tough, like emotionally tough decisions to cut a long-time teammate or a player who just isn't good enough, because in their mind, they set the game up to be so tactical that the game for them isn't about headshots. And so they're just thinking, right, if I can get him into a better position next round, if we'd have just gotten this flash right here and taken long A correctly, he wouldn't have died, or it wouldn't have mattered if he'd have died on the initial entry into short. Like, they start to put the responsibility on themselves because they're great leaders and they can always think of another way to win a game than just shooting you in the head. But as a result, I think some of them go too far thinking they can make the genius move or fit this guy in a way that no one else could into a system, when actually someone else who was playing a more loose style and really was relying on people to use their firepower would just actually, this guy just can't do the job. And so it's ridiculous for me to keep asking him and give him the responsibility of doing this when he can't do what I need from him. Now, that is all said within the context that, to be fair, who was Big going to get better than Nex in this scenario? There's not that many players out there. You probably have to gamble on a younger player or a more inexperienced player and someone who's not German, right? And obviously originally they were going for an all-German lineup. So I don't blame them entirely, but I always had my questions in that particular sense. I think as a final detail, I mean, this is pretty much worth saying, I think, just on XANTARES' level. Let's be real. Yes, he became more and more of a legit player online. I still don't think online he's anywhere close to the superstar he is online. Online, he's a mad onliner. Like, he's legitimately one of the best players in the world online. People think I was joking when I used to say that teams like Virtus Pro should just pay XANTARES to fucking smurf on their accounts. I would do it, because this is the thing. There's a reason why Space Soldiers got to way more lands than they should have in terms of their world ranking. Like, the whole team had some mad onliners. Now, online, yeah, they were just very erratic. Game isn't the same online. It's not that they're shit or cheaters or anything, no. But XANTARES is just so good online that he just can't match that offline, at least hasn't to this point in his career. So having him in big, that's a great quality right there. That's going to help you win a whole bunch of online qualifiers. It's going to get you to some lands. That in itself is probably worth the price of admission in terms of getting a player like him into your team. I think you're going to get a lot from that. I also think, crucially, this makes Big now, for me, a really legit team. Before they were legit in as much as they played a good style, they had a good system, they were reliable, they had a genius in-game leader, they had some overqualified elements. This, though, for me, completes the roles. This means each player in each role makes sense to me, and I could now see this team being a team that now could challenge for that top half of the top 10 rankings in the world. They could be like the 5th best team in the world, start to make real inroads to actually contending for big international titles, and who knows, this is a bit away from now, if they can implement XANTARES, win a big title. I think this is actually now on the cards, because you look at the pieces they have. Tabson, their star player, is overqualified to be in a team of Big's current level. Very good player, could really be in a FaZe, a Mouse Sports. That's the level, or one of the best NA teams. He could be on that level. So already they were kind of getting away with something by having him in the team because he wants to play with GodB. Speaking of which, GodB is way overqualified to be the in-game leader of a team as bad as Big and with the low resources of Big. So again, you've gotten something above and beyond. It's like having a startup. The reason why a startup can very quickly become very, very big in the tech sector isn't just like speculation and getting investors to go. No, it's because you usually get people who are at the core of the startup, the founders, who have like amazing programming skills or visionary like direction. And the whole point is you don't have to pay for that guy's skills in terms of market value because he's part of the startup, has the equity, and he's willing to work for it. So as a result, he's sort of giving away his skills for free early on to later on allow this company to exceed their rivals and become something massive. That's kind of what they had in this team with having GodB and Tabson, because those are the pieces to build a very good international team. And they were willing to play for a smaller team with less money, less access to good players, and as a result, play on a slightly lower level. So with those pieces, then if you add XANTARES, he doesn't have to be one of the best players in the world. If this guy just plays at the Space Soldiers level of what he could do with his raw skill level, you've got now starting to look like a pretty solid team, because then you've got Smooya, who doesn't even have to be even vaguely the star player, but he has good impact. He's an interesting, he's kind of a unique style of AWP I've noticed in terms of how he AWPs. He can have very good games. He has promise in himself as a player, his age, his experience, his first big, truly good international team. But he can also be shaky, but that's not going to matter as much. And you're going to be able to say, hey, be a playmaker. I'll take the games that you have a big game with me and the games that you have a bad game, because you've got pieces elsewhere and it's not going to live or die on you like it was when it was just Tabson and Smooya most of the time. Then finally, who's left? Tizian. Tizian, actually, if you look at what he does for Big, is doing a great job. Like, he looks like a very legit supportive element, seemed to fit into the whole team play element early on, seems as though is the type of player GodB likes to play with. I think if you look at the team now, where are the weak spots? This is a pretty nicely rounded team, right? And actually, for a supportive player, Tizian is by no means a strong player, but he's got some pretty solid fragging, actually, for a supportive element. And so GodB's really your only weak player. Tizian's not a really strong player. You're starting to look like you've got even a pretty decent skill level. And I would say overall, because Smooya's so shaky, skill level was, as I said, with the firepower angle, aggregate wasn't that great in this team before. Now it's skewed to be pretty decent for the top 10 in Europe. I think the problem here is there's now no excuse for Big or GodB. Like, if you think GodB is a truly godlike in-game leader, like still now one of the best in the world, he's not someone who was years ago one of the best, like Existence, like Sean Gares, then what excuse does he have now? Because aside from the language angle, the fact that they're not going to be speaking in German all the time, which too, admittedly, can be a big deal for both an international team and for a team that, I mean, this style of tactical team, where you'd probably want them all to speak German if they could, so GodB could get his ideas across perfectly. But beyond that one caveat, they've got legit firepower, they've got a great in-game leader, they get to boot camp, they've got a good supportive piece, they've got a core that's played together, they've got some experience under their belts, they've got a hungry player coming in now. What excuse do you have? You have no excuse for failing anymore. Now you have to be judged accordingly to everyone else. Now you have to judge them versus a Mouse Sports, a Team Liquid, NRG, MIBR, Astralis, FaZe, Na'Vi, NIP. These are the teams now you have to judge Big against. You can no longer give them all those, they're a smaller team. Well, they can't get the better players. No, now the pieces are there where they should be very competitive against some of the teams I've just listed off now. As I alluded to before, I don't really buy the whole six-man angle. I think it's way more likely that if XANTARES works out, that Nex comes back and he's a sob, or XANTARES doesn't work out and Nex comes back and they sob XANTARES. I think the angle people haven't noticed with this one, this is the part that I found weird that so few people picked up on, is XANTARES is from Turkey, Turkey politically is having a whole bunch of issues at the moment. I mean, obviously there's that whole thing with the embassy where visas were already tough to get. They're getting a bit tougher in some ways, especially for countries like the USA. Here's the angle people haven't thought of, is if you have XANTARES in your team and he doesn't get a visa for an event, but you have Nex and he's come back from his surgery and he's in your rotation or your sub, well, you can use Nex for the event. It's not going to be as good as having XANTARES, but hey, you know what? That's your old lineup. You can still use it. You can still have a chance at succeeding. It's not like some of these lands where they have to take like the fetchiest guy, the guy from Estonia, like Hellraisers I've had before, because Woxic can't make it, and that just basically kills your team dead. Not because the fetchiest guy is crap, but because he's not Woxic and he can't vaguely even play in a team he's never played with before, and it's going to ruin the whole squad. No, this would be a clever way to offset one of the downsides of XANTARES, which is the whole visa angle, the fact that he's not from Europe traditionally, as it's called. I mean, I've never really understood the whole push to have like Israel and Turkey be part of Europe, but whatever, it's a whole separate thing, isn't it? So I think that's an angle people maybe missed, and I personally think this is code for like we're gradually moving Nex out of the lineup. But now it's time to watch big. Before I like to watch them for the tactics, I didn't find them that exciting because I didn't think they could win most of the matches. Now I actually have a lot of interest because they look like a very well-rounded team with nice pieces, and the promise to actually get a bit better seems like it's legitimately there. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas, Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, James Harding, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my upcoming content? Perhaps you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Do you want to see some teasers? See who's going to be the next guest on one of my shows? Maybe you want to take part in an esports discussion with me. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.